Hey, buddy, I don't know who you think you are, but dogs are not allowed in here. Our rule is no pets. I don't care what your law says, I'm the law.
Restaurant manager kicked out, disabled veteran. Then 10 Hells Angels at next table stood up. When restaurant manager Brad Thompson humiliated disabled veteran Marcus Rodriguez over his service dog, he thought he was enforcing policy. He had no idea 10 Hells Angels at the corner table were recording everything and planning his downfall. The Chrome Horse restaurant glowed like a neon beacon against Arizona's desert night, where chrome fixtures caught conversations about horsepower and brotherhood, while servers in leather vests moved between tables filled with truckers and bikers. The smell of grilled meat mixed with cigarette smoke and motor oil, creating an atmosphere that celebrated working-class culture. But corporate policies often clashed with blue-collar values about honor and respect for those who'd served. Marcus Rodriguez wheeled through the Chrome Horse entrance with careful dignity, his service dog Ranger walking in perfect formation beside his chair. Two warriors bearing invisible scars from Afghan battlefields. At 32, Marcus carried himself with the military bearing that 2 combat tours had instilled, though IED shrapnel had left him dependent on assistance that the civilian world struggled to understand. Ranger wasn't just a companion, but a lifeline, trained to detect panic attacks, interrupt flashbacks, and provide stability when PTSD symptoms threatened Marcus's ability to function in crowded spaces. The dog's vest clearly marked "Service Dog, Do Not Pet" should have prevented complications, but civilian ignorance about disability rights often created battles that veterans shouldn't have faced after already serving their country with honor. What other diners couldn't see were invisible wounds etched into Marcus's steady composure. Months of rehabilitation, learning to navigate a world that praised veterans publicly while discriminating privately when disabilities became inconvenient. Marcus's challenge transcended access issues. It was about dignity in spaces that claimed to welcome those who'd served. How do you maintain composure when ignorance meets arrogance? How do you educate while defending basic rights? He fought to exist as a complete person rather than an inconvenience requiring accommodation, carrying hard-earned wisdom about service that civilian authority rarely respected. Marcus had chosen the Chrome Horse specifically for their veteran-friendly website claims, but the hostess's expression immediately revealed the gap between marketing and reality. Her eyes shifted from Marcus to Ranger with obvious discomfort, suggesting policy complications rather than welcoming service. "Table for one, please," Marcus requested with military courtesy that civilian rudeness had never diminished. "I'm sorry, but we don't allow pets," she replied with practiced efficiency, clearly having delivered similar rejections without considering their legal implications. "He's my service dog," Marcus explained calmly, producing documentation while Ranger maintained perfect positioning. "He's legally protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act." The hostess's confusion was immediate and problematic. Obviously untrained on disability rights, despite working in an establishment that marketed itself as supporting veterans whose service often resulted in injuries requiring accommodation that businesses were legally required to provide. Her eyes darted nervously toward the manager's office, already preparing to escalate rather than accommodate. Brad Thompson approached with aggressive confidence, his body language transforming a simple accommodation request into a power struggle designed to establish authority rather than solve problems. His swagger, suggested someone who viewed disability rights as inconvenient technicalities rather than protections earned through service and sacrifice. "Sir, I'm asking you to remove your animal from the premises," Thompson announced loudly enough for surrounding diners to hear, his tone implying Marcus was causing problems rather than requesting legally mandated accommodation. "He's my service dog," Marcus repeated with patience earned through countless similar encounters. "Federal law requires accommodation in all public facilities." Thompson's response revealed ignorance masquerading as authority. "I don't care what you call him. No animals means no animals. Tie him outside or find somewhere else to eat." The suggestion that a veteran should abandon his medical assistance to satisfy ignorant management created exactly the humiliation that civilian society regularly inflicted on people who'd already sacrificed enough for their country's freedom. The leather-clad figures at the corner table shifted in their seats. Marcus produced his veteran identification alongside service dog certification, speaking with controlled precision that military training had ingrained for hostile situations requiring de-escalation rather than confrontation. "Everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about," Marcus said quietly, attempting education over escalation. "I'm a disabled veteran, and this dog is medical equipment. Federal law protects our right to access restaurants like any other customer." Thompson's response revealed the depth of civilian ignorance. "I don't care if you're a war hero or whatever. Rules are rules, and my rule is no dogs." The dismissal of Marcus's service and sacrifice, combined with illegal denial of disability accommodation, created exactly the injustice that would soon attract attention from people whose code demanded response to disrespect shown toward veterans. At the corner table, Tank Morrison's jaw tightened as he watched his phone record Thompson's illegal discrimination. The other angels leaned forward, their own military backgrounds recognizing a brother being systematically humiliated by civilian authority that had never earned the right to judge people who'd served with honor. The confrontation was about to escalate beyond Thompson's control or understanding. Thompson's treatment escalated beyond ignorance into deliberate cruelty, his voice carrying across the restaurant as he continued berating a disabled veteran for requiring legally mandated accommodation. The performance was designed to demonstrate power over someone he perceived as unable to retaliate. "Look, wheelchair boy, I don't know what sob story you're selling, but this is a business, not a charity," Thompson sneered, his words chosen to inflict maximum humiliation while other diners watched in uncomfortable silence. Marcus absorbed the verbal assault with dignity that shamed witnessing adults. "Everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about," he repeated, his voice steady, despite emotional violence being inflicted by someone who'd never worn a uniform or faced enemy fire. The abuse continued as Thompson threatened security, suggested Marcus was faking disability, and demanded proof his injuries were real enough to justify accommodation. Exactly the civilian ignorance that made veteran reintegration unnecessarily traumatic. At the corner table, Tank's phone captured every word, while his brother's anger built toward a response that Motorcycle Club honor demanded when veterans were disrespected by people who'd never served their country. Tank Morrison and 9 brothers from the Phoenix Hells Angels had been enjoying a quiet dinner when Thompson's systematic abuse began, their military backgrounds immediately recognizing a fellow veteran being humiliated by a civilian authority that had never earned the right to judge people who'd served with honor. Ghost leaned across their table, his Iraq War experience making Thompson's discrimination personally offensive. That manager just violated federal law on camera while humiliating a brother who gave more for this country than that civilian piece of shit will ever understand. Roadkill, whose own PTSD service dog waited outside per a restaurant policy they'd mistakenly accepted, realized they were witnessing exactly the kind of ignorance that made veteran reintegration unnecessarily difficult for people who deserved respect rather than systematic degradation. "Brothers," Tank said quietly, his phone still recording, "we're about to provide some education about treating veterans with the respect they've earned through service and sacrifice. Their military brotherhood transcended branch rivalry or civilian social boundaries, creating bonds that demanded a response when veterans faced discrimination from people whose freedom they'd protected overseas." Despite Thompson's escalating abuse, Marcus maintained a composure that demonstrated the character Thompson couldn't recognize or respect. His response revealed military training that had prepared him for hostile environments where dignity mattered more than comfort. "Sir, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan protecting your right to run this restaurant in a free country," Marcus said with quiet authority that silenced nearby conversations. "I earned the right to access public accommodations, same as any citizen, and my service dog is medical equipment that federal law protects." The statement landed with a force that Thompson hadn't anticipated, reminding everyone present that the man being humiliated had actually served something larger than himself, while the manager had apparently served only his own convenience and ignorance. But Thompson's response revealed how deeply civilian arrogance could run when confronted with actual heroism. "I don't give a damn what you did overseas. This is my restaurant, and I make the rules here." The dismissal of Marcus's service created exactly the moment that Tank Morrison had been waiting for. His recording now containing evidence of not just illegal discrimination, but profound disrespect for military service that demanded immediate correction through an education Thompson would never forget. Thompson's ultimate escalation came when he called police to remove Marcus for disturbing the peace, despite clear evidence that management was violating disability rights while creating the only disturbance through their illegal discrimination against a veteran who'd done nothing except request legally mandated accommodation. "Officer, I want this man and his animal removed from my property immediately," Thompson announced when police arrived, his confidence suggesting he expected law enforcement support for discrimination that any trained officer should recognize as a federal civil rights violation. The restaurant fell silent as 2 uniformed officers entered, their presence transforming Thompson's abuse into an official confrontation that would either vindicate his illegal policies or expose his systematic violation of veteran rights under federal scrutiny. Marcus sat quietly in his wheelchair, Ranger maintaining perfect position, while civilian authority figures who dismissed his rights suddenly faced law enforcement attention that would determine whether discrimination or dignity would prevail in this encounter. Tank Morrison closed his phone recording and stood with his 9 brothers, their leather vests bearing patches that identified them as fellow veterans whose loyalty to military brotherhood demanded immediate intervention in defense of someone whose service had earned respect rather than systematic humiliation from ignorant civilian management. Tank Morrison's approach with 9 Hells Angels transformed the restaurant's power dynamic instantly. Their leather vests, bearing military patches that commanded respect through demonstrated service rather than threatened violence. The sight of 10 bikers surrounding Thompson created immediate silence as other diners processed the shift from routine discrimination to potential confrontation. "Mr. Thompson," Tank said with controlled precision, "I'm Tank Morrison, a former Marine sergeant and president of the Phoenix Hells Angels. We've been recording your illegal treatment of this disabled veteran, and we're here to provide education about federal disability rights law." Thompson's confident discrimination evaporated as he realized his abuse of Marcus had been witnessed and documented by people whose reputation preceded them into every civilian interaction. The manager, who'd felt powerful, humiliating a wheelchair-bound veteran, suddenly faced 10 men whose military service exceeded his own imagined authority. The restaurant atmosphere shifted from uncomfortable embarrassment to electric tension as police officers found themselves mediating a civil rights violation involving multiple military veterans whose legal knowledge exceeded management's understanding of their own obligations under federal law. "Everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about," Tank continued, his voice carrying across the silent dining room. "But this veteran shouldn't have to fight battles for basic respect in restaurants that claim to support people who serve their country." Tank's presentation of video evidence transformed Thompson's confident discrimination into a legal crisis that threatened both personal and corporate consequences for violating federal disability rights, while systematically abusing a veteran who'd earned accommodation through service and sacrifice. "Officers, this establishment has violated the Americans with Disabilities Act by denying service dog accommodation, engaged in illegal discrimination based on disability status, and created a hostile environment for a customer who served our country in combat." Tank explained with legal precision that surprised civilian authority figures who'd underestimated motorcycle club members' expertise. The police officers reviewed Tank's recording, while Thompson's earlier confidence dissolved into panic as he understood his treatment of Marcus had been captured with professional quality that would support substantial legal action against both him personally and the restaurant corporation. Marcus remained seated in his wheelchair, Ranger maintaining perfect position, while civilian authority figures who dismissed his rights suddenly discovered that federal law carried enforcement mechanisms they hadn't anticipated when making decisions based on ignorance rather than legal requirements. "This veteran fought battles in Afghanistan that earned him rights you violated," Tank said to Thompson, "and we're here to ensure those rights are respected by people who benefit from freedoms that veterans like Marcus protected with their blood and sacrifice." The moral authority in Tank's words created a shame that Thompson's ignorance had been unable to generate through simple legal citations. Corporate headquarters, contacted within minutes by both legal advocates and social media networks, immediately distanced itself from Thompson's actions, while promising policy changes that should have been implemented before employees were allowed to interact with disabled customers whose rights they didn't understand. Thompson's termination was announced within the hour, as restaurant ownership realized that defending discrimination against disabled veterans would create public relations disasters that could destroy businesses built on marketing themselves as veteran-friendly establishments that clearly hadn't trained staff on federal disability rights law. The swift corporate response revealed how quickly civilian institutions could correct systematic failures when faced with consequences rather than simply managing complaints that had previously been ignored or dismissed as inconvenient complications to normal business operations. Marcus, still processing the transformation from humiliation to vindication, understood he'd found allies whose code demanded protection of veterans regardless of civilian convenience or ignorant management policies that violated legal requirements while demonstrating contempt for people who'd earned respect through service and sacrifice. "Brother," Tank said, approaching Marcus with genuine respect, "no veteran should face this kind of treatment. We've got your back, and we'll make sure this never happens again." The Chrome Horse restaurant's corporate management faced a federal civil rights investigation while managing a public relations disaster that threatened a franchise reputation built on military-friendly marketing exposed as fraudulent when tested by an actual disabled veteran seeking basic accommodation required by law. Tank's video, spreading across veteran social media networks with viral intensity, generated millions of views while attracting support from disability advocates and legal organizations whose expertise would ensure maximum consequences for discrimination that had been systematically ignored by management more concerned with convenience than compliance. "Everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about," Tank told gathering media outside the restaurant. "But Marcus shouldn't have to fight battles for dignity in places that claim to honor people who serve their country with distinction." The corporate apology, issued within hours, promised comprehensive policy changes and mandatory disability training for all employees, changes that should have been implemented years earlier to prevent the systematic discrimination that Marcus had courageously documented. National coverage transformed Marcus's individual humiliation into a conversation about veteran treatment and disability rights, with Tank's recording becoming evidence in a federal investigation while generating support from organizations whose resources would ensure comprehensive consequences for discrimination. The Chrome Horse found themselves managing a crisis that extended beyond a single incident to a pattern of systematic failure in accommodating disabled customers, creating a liability that threatened multiple franchise locations while exposing corporate policies that had prioritized profits over legal compliance and moral obligation. Marcus's dignity throughout the encounter made him a symbol of grace under pressure, while Thompson's termination became a cautionary tale about the consequences of discriminating against people who'd earned respect through service that civilian managers had never provided to their communities or country. "Brother, you handled that with more class than that civilian deserved," Tank told Marcus as they shared coffee at a veteran-owned establishment that understood accommodation was respect, not inconvenience. Federal investigators discovered Chrome Horse franchises had received multiple complaints about service dog discrimination, but had failed to implement training or policy changes, creating a pattern of violations that supported substantial penalties extending far beyond Marcus's individual case. Tank's legal background, combined with his club's resources, ensured Marcus received representation that corporate attorneys couldn't intimidate, while veteran organizations provided additional support for pursuing maximum consequences for discrimination that had been systematically ignored by management. The settlement negotiations revealed Thompson's abuse represented institutional failure rather than an isolated incident, creating grounds for comprehensive policy changes that would benefit all disabled veterans seeking accommodation in restaurant chains that had previously failed to respect their rights earned through military service. Marcus found strength in a brotherhood that extended beyond official military connections to include informal networks whose members defended veterans facing civilian discrimination with the same loyalty they'd shown overseas. The resolution required Chrome Horse to implement mandatory disability training, establish veteran ombudsman positions, and create monitoring systems preventing future discrimination against disabled customers, whose accommodation was a legal requirement rather than corporate charity that could be denied at management discretion. Marcus's experience became training material throughout the restaurant industry, while demonstrating legal requirements and moral obligations that businesses owed to customers whose disabilities resulted from military service protecting freedoms that civilian managers took for granted while violating the rights of people who'd paid for those freedoms. Tank's intervention proved veteran community support transcended official organizations to include networks whose members would defend brothers facing discrimination from civilian authority figures who'd never earned the right to disrespect people who'd served with honor. Their friendship deepened through a shared understanding of battles that extended beyond military service to include civilian challenges that required different strategies but identical courage and mutual support among people who understood sacrifice and loyalty. 6 months later, Marcus had become a regular at Phoenix Hells Angels events, his mechanical expertise valued while his character earned respect that transcended his disability to recognize the contributions he made to a community that appreciated competence over pity or discrimination. Tank's mentorship helped Marcus navigate veteran services while connecting him with employment opportunities that utilized his skills rather than limiting his potential, based on wheelchair use or civilian misunderstanding about veteran capabilities, and worth to employers who valued character over physical ability. "Everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about" became their shared motto for veteran advocacy work. But those battles become winnable when brothers stand together against ignorance that tries to diminish what we've earned through service and sacrifice for people who benefit from our protection. The brotherhood forged through confronting discrimination created lasting bonds that demonstrated military service, created family connections that extended beyond official discharge papers to include lifelong loyalty among people who understood duty, honor, and mutual support in a civilian world that often failed to appreciate their value. Marcus's case inspired the creation of the Veteran Dignity Project, connecting motorcycle clubs with disability rights organizations to provide advocacy and legal support for veterans facing discrimination in public accommodations. Tank served as a coordinator, while Marcus became a spokesperson for disabled veteran rights education. "Everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about," Marcus told audiences at conferences nationwide. "But those battles become winnable when brothers stand together against civilian ignorance that tries to diminish what we've earned through service and sacrifice." The Chrome Horse Settlement funded training programs educating the restaurant industry about disability rights, while establishing monitoring systems preventing future discrimination against veterans whose accommodation was a legal requirement, not a corporate charity that could be denied at management discretion. 3 years later, Marcus had become a national advocate for disabled veteran rights while maintaining his friendship with Tank and the Phoenix chapter. Their brotherhood, proving military service, created bonds transcending official discharge papers or civilian social boundaries that had previously limited veteran community support. The restaurant industry implemented comprehensive disability training after realizing veteran customers represented a significant market whose loyalty could be earned through respect rather than lost through discrimination, violating legal requirements and moral obligations owed to people who'd served their country. Sometimes the most powerful protection comes from unexpected brotherhood, teaching us that everyone deserves champions who see service rather than limitations, sacrifice rather than accommodation needs, earning respect through character while demanding it for all who've served something larger than themselves. The strongest people are usually fighting battles you know nothing about, and sometimes those battles create exactly the brotherhood needed to defend others facing similar struggles, showing us that respect must be earned through character, but should be granted to all who've served something larger than themselves, regardless of the invisible wounds they carry from protecting freedoms others take for granted.